At Arlington Prestige Motors, money didn't whisper, it judged. The place wasn't a car dealership, it was a cathedral where wealth was worshipped and the scent of leather was more sacred than truth. Marble floors mirrored ceiling-high glass, each step echoing like a credit check. Salespeople didn't sell, they curated. Espresso machines steamed in sync with shallow conversations about track performance and 0 to 60 specs, but only if you looked like you belonged in this temple of high-gloss ego and silent exclusivity. Even breathing felt like a privilege that came with a payment plan. And that's exactly the air Cameron and Terence walked into, without a dollar of permission, but with the kind of wide-eyed wonder that hadn't yet been told to sit down and shut up. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. Cameron, 17, lanky and built like he hadn't caught up to his own height, held the door for his 15-year-old brother Terence. They rode bikes older than some of the car's oil changes, and wore white t-shirts and combat shorts, scuffed sneakers, dragging city dust in behind them. They weren't there to stunt. They were there to marvel. The Venom GT sat in the center of the floor like a Black Panther mid-stretch. $2,800,000, 0 cents in carbon, chrome, and cruelty. That's it, Cameron whispered, like he'd just seen God. Terence nodded, eyes wide. They stepped toward it. Not to touch, just to look, mouths half open like kids at a museum, because this was their Sistine Chapel on wheels. But wonder, it turned out, wasn't welcome without a tailored suit and Amex black. A voice sliced through the air, sharp and chilled. "Can I help you?" It wasn't a question, it was an eviction notice wrapped in polite syllables. Bradley Shore, top salesman for 4 years, stood with arms folded, cufflinks flashing disapproval. His gaze slid down Cameron's legs like gravity was beneath him, landing hard on those beat-up sneakers. "You boys know this car starts at $2.8 million, right?" he said, over-enunciating like they didn't speak dollars. Terrence's posture crumpled. Cameron cleared his throat. "We were just admiring it." Bradley smirked. "Maybe check out something less advanced. These aren't for spectators." That word, spectators, hung in the air like an accusation. It didn't just mean, you don't belong. It meant, you never did. A couple in sunglasses chuckled under their breath, then turned away like the scene had played out the way it always does. The dreamers walk in and reality shows them the door. But then, a voice, a different kind, broke through. "Do you have a minute?" A woman in black slacks and a cream blouse, with curly hair pulled back and a badge that read Clarissa Hale, stepped forward. She didn't smile like she was doing them a favor, she just looked at them like they were human. "You were asking about the Venom GT?" she said, calm as lake water. "It's a beautiful machine. Want to sit inside?" Terence blinked. "Seriously?" "Seriously," she said, opening the door. "No pity, no fanfare, just an offer." They climbed in one at a time, quiet, respectful. No selfies, no bouncing. They just sat, soaking in the cockpit of a future they dared to believe could include them. When they stepped out, she handed Cameron her card. "You ever have more questions, you call me directly." He took it like it was made of gold. Somewhere across the room, Bradley scoffed. Clarissa heard it. She didn't flinch. The boys left with their heads a little higher, but the silence on their way out still felt heavier than anything they'd carried in. They weren't escorted out, but they weren't exactly welcomed either. Arlington Prestige had done what so many polished places do. It measured people by polish. And yet, something had shifted. Maybe not in the room, maybe not in Bradley, but in the boys. Because someone had seen them, not through fabric, not through price tags, through presence. The showroom measured their shoes, but Clarissa measured their questions. Bradley saw shorts and sneakers, she saw spark and sincerity. Arlington dismissed them in silence. But legacy doesn't need noise. It only needs someone willing to see past appearances. Because they were dismissed by fabric, but they were sewn from something far stronger. They pedaled home through Lake Forest, where the streets were lined with trees clipped by landscaping crews, and driveways stretched longer than basketball courts. The homes weren't just big, they were curated. Every porch light was the same soft gold, every lawn a green carpet with invisible fences. Neighbors waved from behind tinted windows and Bentleys. No one asked where the boys had been. No one needed to. This wasn't a neighborhood where people assumed you went to car dealerships on bicycles. Cameron and Terrence's wheels hummed over brick pavers, but their silence spoke louder. They weren't carrying backpacks full of books. They were carrying something heavier, an unspoken weight made of side eyes, smirks, and the word spectator still ringing like an echo that didn't know how to fade. Inside the house, sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows like it was auditioning for a magazine spread. Art lined the walls, not replicas, but originals. A grand piano sat at the end of a white hallway, untouched, as if waiting for someone who no longer played. The boys passed it without a glance. They found their father in his study, not typing, not reading, just sitting in front of that piano, his fingers still and curved, resting above the keys but never pressing them. Dr. Nathaniel Wells didn't need to raise his voice to make a room fall silent. He didn't have to look up to let you know he had already heard you walk in. Some men carry power in their name. Others carry it in their pause. Nathaniel was the kind of man who made stillness feel like a sermon. And when Cameron closed the door behind them with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have, Nathaniel finally spoke. "Back already?" he asked, not coldly, just calmly, like he'd known the answer before they opened the door. They didn't answer right away. Terrence shifted from foot to foot, but Cameron stepped forward, eyes uncertain. "Yeah, we didn't stay long." Their father turned slightly, offering nothing but attention. Not suspicion, not judgment, just presence. "Everything all right?" he asked. And suddenly all the rehearsed lines, the cover stories, the "we're ready to perform" fell apart in Cameron's throat. "Not really," he admitted. Nathaniel gestured toward two leather chairs by the fireplace. "Sit." The boys dropped their bags and sank into the cushions. The silence hung again, not heavy, but full. Jazz drifted faintly from another room, mixing with the slow tick of a wall clock older than all of them. "Tell me what happened," he said, not as a command, but as a bridge, sturdy and open. So they told him, slowly, like peeling bandages. First Cameron, stiff at first, describing the car, the showroom, the dismissal. Then Terrence, his voice tight, explaining how Bradley looked at them, not like customers, but like intruders. "He laughed," Terrence said. "Said the car cost more than our lives." The room didn't flinch, but something inside it shifted. Nathaniel listened without interruption. When they finished, he didn't ask for the man's name. He didn't ask what kind of car it was. He didn't even ask what Clarissa had done. He only asked one thing. "Did she know who you were?" Cameron shook his head. "No, we didn't say our last name." Nathaniel nodded almost to himself. He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Outside, the lawn stretched like a painting, perfect, trimmed, unreal. "People often confuse appearance with value," he said, "and that tells you far more about them than it ever does about you." He turned to face them, not smiling, not frowning, just watching. "You did nothing wrong. You didn't act out, you didn't shrink, and you told me the truth. That's all I need from you." There was no lecture, no raised voice, just clarity that cut deeper than anger. The boys sat with it, unsure if the conversation was over or just beginning. But Nathaniel had already moved back to his seat, lifting a glass of something amber without drinking it, like it was just part of the ritual. Terrence hesitated. "You're not mad?" Nathaniel's gaze didn't shift. "At who?" Cameron shrugged. "The salesman, the people who laughed," their father exhaled, slow and centered. "I don't waste energy being angry at people who show me who they are. I just remember, and when the time is right, I act." He raised the glass, not to sip, but to mark the end of the discussion. The boys nodded, stood, and left quietly. Behind them, the door whispered shut. Upstairs, their rooms held teenage comforts, sketch pads, tablets, posters of machines that looked like dreams with engines. But downstairs, the man they called Dad hadn't moved. He sat in the same leather chair, facing the same keys he hadn't played in months. And when he finally opened his laptop, the glow lit his face, not with fury, but with purpose. Not with ego, but with memory. Because some lessons are taught in shouts, others in silence. And this one would be signed, sealed, and delivered with the kind of message you don't write in words. You drive it straight to the front door. Night in Lake Forest doesn't fall. It lowers itself gently like a curtain in a theater, quiet and deliberate. Inside the study, the room hadn't changed, but the energy had. Dr. Nathaniel Wells sat with his laptop open, the screen casting a cool glow across his still face. The jazz upstairs was gone now. The only soundtrack was the soft clicking of keys and the whispering hum of a man who was not reacting, but responding. His plan was not born from spite. It was orchestrated like a military op. He didn't want fireworks, he wanted symmetry, timing. "No logos," he said into the phone, his voice even. "No movement until I arrive. Let the silence do the talking." On the other end, Garrison, his longtime logistics manager, said nothing for a beat, then replied, "Understood." And that was all it took. 2 hypercars were being prepped that night, not for display, not for showmanship, but for message delivery, the kind that didn't need a horn to be heard. Nathaniel reached for a narrow black box nestled in the cabinet beside the window. Inside was the silver pen. Matte, heavy, engraved with NYW. It had been a gift from the man who'd written his first investment check, back when Nathaniel was still pitching algorithms to people who only saw skin before they saw value. He hadn't used that pen in nearly a decade, not because he'd forgotten it, but because he'd reserved it. Some tools aren't for everyday use. They're for days that matter. He opened the purchase folder, pre-filled with specs, custom details, delivery timelines, his name already typed, just waiting for ink. As he signed, he paused for a breath, not because of doubt, because of weight. This wasn't just a signature, it was a page being turned. A mark left intentionally so that the story no longer needed to be told, it would be understood. To the outside world, it might look like a man buying 2 cars. To those who had ears for power, it was something far more deliberate. Nathaniel didn't raise his voice, not because he lacked rage, but because he knew volume never guaranteed clarity. This wasn't revenge, it was a recalibration of respect. The kind of correction that doesn't slap, it stings slowly, leaving a memory behind like perfume on linen. His plan wasn't to storm back into the dealership to make a scene. It was to return with such poise and precision that the building itself would feel smaller. Not one wheel would turn before the moment called for it. Not one gesture would break the stillness unless it whispered discipline. He wasn't bringing noise. He was bringing a lesson. He reviewed the final checklist like a conductor before curtain. 2 Aurelius boat looms modeled 7 and 9, detailed, waxed, delivered with full spec. Drivers briefed not to move an inch until instructed. Doors closed. Engines cut. No marketing banners, no flaunting, just raw, unfiltered presence. The script was set, and it had no dialogue, only entrances and exits. And like all good stories, it was going to unfold at the perfect moment. He closed the laptop and stared out the window, where the street lamps cast long shadows. The stillness outside mirrored the readiness inside. Nothing more to say, just time to act. At exactly 8:45 IEMing the next morning, the world would witness something not designed for spectacle, but for memory. No early arrival, no late entrance. 2 sons would step out wearing the same clothes they'd been judged in, and the showroom that once whispered dismissal would now hold its breath. Nathaniel wouldn't speak to reclaim power. He'd bring it with him. The glass doors that hissed yesterday with rejection would part again. But this time, they wouldn't be doors, they'd be mirrors. And every person inside would see who they were in the silence they once used to measure others. 2 cars, 2 sons. One morning, not a comeback, a correction. And some reckonings don't raise their voice, they just arrive. The morning sun slid across the Chicago skyline like a spotlight warming up for a show nobody knew was about to begin. But Arlington Prestige Motors was the stage, and every pane of glass was a front-row seat to the kind of entrance that doesn't need permission. At precisely 8:45 a.m., 2 Aurelius Boatloom hypercars pulled up in perfect harmony, one obsidian black with silver carbon accents, the other cloaked in deep blue laced with a quiet glint of gold. No exhaust roared. No engines revved. The arrival wasn't theatrical. It was mathematical. Every movement exact. Every pause intentional. Doors stayed closed. Engines went silent. They didn't need noise to be noticed. And when the rear door of the blue hypercar opened, the air shifted like it remembered what it had done yesterday. Cameron stepped out first, still in the white t-shirt and combat shorts from the day before. Terrence followed, matching his brother's steady stillness, his scuffed sneakers somehow sharper now than any polished shoe on the lot. They weren't dressed different. They stood different. The same outfits were no longer camouflage, they were clarity. The showroom inside, so proud of its pristine silence, was about to learn that silence isn't always on its side. Heads turned, phones lifted. A customer near the Venom GT leaned against the window, mouth slightly open, espresso suspended mid-air. One salesperson stopped typing. Another adjusted their tie and failed to hide their squint. Even the espresso machine sputtered quieter, as if waiting to see what would happen next. Then the second car door opened, and when Dr. Nathaniel Wells stepped onto the pavement, even the automatic doors hesitated, parting not like a welcome but like a warning. He walked with the kind of calm that made people nervous. No security, no entourage, no introduction, just presence. His charcoal suit was tailored, yes, but the cut didn't carry him. He carried it. He didn't smile, didn't scan the room, he simply walked. And behind the glass, Bradley Shore froze mid-sentence. He had been retelling yesterday's humiliation to a junior associate, mocking Cameron's excited face, twisting it into parody. The moment his eyes met the real thing, his mouth stopped mid-word. The smirk drained like air from a punctured tire. The doors opened with the same quiet hiss they had yesterday, but this time that sound didn't dismiss, it announced. The 3 figures stepped in. No one moved to greet them. Not a single staff member approached. Customers stepped aside instinctively, like the floor itself had redrawn its boundaries. The receptionist blinked, unsure whether to speak or salute. Nathaniel stopped at the counter, his sons flanking him like calm sentries. "I'd like to speak with the staff member who assisted my sons yesterday," he said, each syllable smooth but unswerving. The room didn't know how to breathe. The receptionist nodded, began to stand. But Bradley jumped in first, too quickly, voice climbing into a forced cheer. "Sir, that was me. We actually spoke yesterday. I helped your sons." Nathaniel turned just slightly, gaze locked, not furious, just final. "No," he said, voice like a scalpel. "You weren't the one who helped them." Bradley's face twitched. His mouth opened, but no sound followed. His body stood, but his confidence sat down. The silence between them felt like thunder with the volume turned off. Nathaniel didn't even bother to ask his name. He turned instead to the man behind the glass wall. "You're the floor manager?" The man stepped forward, cautious. "Yes, sir. I assume your security cameras are working?" The manager nodded once, already pale. "Yes." "Everything's archived?" Nathaniel nodded. "Then I suggest you review the footage before we continue this conversation." And just like that, the dealership was put on hold. The manager disappeared into his office. No one moved. No one knew where to look. Customers exchanged glances like they'd been caught watching something sacred. A woman whispered to her husband, who whispered back, "Don't say a word." The espresso machine hissed again, but dared not sputter. Clarissa hadn't yet arrived, the footage had not yet been reviewed, but the atmosphere had already been rewritten. Bradley stood in place like a man waiting for a verdict he'd already heard. 10 minutes later, the manager returned. His expression had changed. He looked like someone who had just reread their own resume and found it wanting. "We reviewed the footage," he said, voice controlled. "The staff member who assisted your sons was Miss Clarissa Hale." Nathaniel didn't blink. He turned slightly toward Bradley. "And this man?" The manager swallowed. "He misrepresented the interaction. His behavior was unprofessional and discriminatory." Bradley's jaw clenched. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He didn't have the script for this version of the story, where the punchline belonged to someone else. The boys didn't smirk. They didn't glare. They simply stood, unchanged in clothing but transformed in meaning. Yesterday they were distractions, today they were definition. The manager nodded toward security. "Effective immediately, Bradley Shore is terminated from his position at Arlington Prestige Motors. He will be escorted off the premises." A few soft gasps floated through the air. No one clapped. No one cheered. That would have cheapened the moment. Bradley turned without a word. As he passed Cameron and Terrence, his eyes stayed fixed on the ground. They didn't need to look at him. They had already seen what they needed to. He exited through the same doors that had once hissed their dismissal, but unlike them, he didn't walk out lighter. He left with less than nothing. Nathaniel didn't watch him leave. He turned instead to the manager. "Now," he said, like the second hand of a clock finally ticking into place. "Bring me Miss Hale." Bradley's walk to the exit was not long, but it was endless. There was no yelling, no shoving, no final outburst to justify the humiliation, just the hollow sound of loafers scraping marble, echoing through a room too polite to cheer and too shocked to blink. Employees turned away with the sudden fascination of people pretending to look busy. Customers watched without pretending at all. No one reached out to shake his hand. No one nodded in solidarity. He didn't leave a man, he left a cautionary tale. And the glass doors that had once hissed at two boys now opened again, but this time for someone who had measured others by decency, not discounts. When Bradley passed Cameron and Terrence, his gaze never lifted. Not because he was ashamed to face them, but because he finally understood. He was never their superior. He just had the louder voice. Until silence took it away. As the doors sealed behind him, the atmosphere didn't release, it deepened. Dr. Nathaniel Wells turned finally toward the room, not with fury, but with focus. He looked at the stunned staff, then rested his gaze on the floor manager, who fidgeted with a clipboard like it might deflect judgment. "This man," Nathaniel said, never once needing to say Bradley's name, "judged my sons the moment they walked in, not based on who they were, but on what they wore. He didn't ask a question, he didn't offer help, he laughed." The silence stretched, taut as wire. Then came the words no one in that showroom would forget. He didn't just fail as a salesperson. He failed as a human being. There was no applause, but in the stillness something heavier than clapping settled in. Moral verdict had been delivered, and it stuck. Then Clarissa stepped onto the floor, summoned by the manager, unaware that the morning had rewritten her career. She wore the same calm presence as the day before, clipboard in hand, eyes attentive but uncertain. When she saw Cameron and Terrence, she smiled, but hesitated. "Is everything okay?" Nathaniel approached her, offering the faintest smile in return. "More than okay," he said. "You treated my sons with respect when no one else did. You listened. You saw them. That mattered." Krista blinked, surprised. They were polite, thoughtful. It was no trouble. Nathaniel turned toward the Venom GT. "They liked that one. Every feature they mentioned. Add it. Clarissa looked to the manager for confirmation, only to be handed a sealed envelope. She opened it, scanned, then gasped. Barely. Senior sales consultant, the letter read. Not a gift. A recognition. The deal closed quietly, no fanfare. Nathaniel signed with the same silver pen, handing the keys directly to his sons. Happy early birthday, he said, as though he were offering something smaller than a $3 million car. But it wasn't about the vehicle. It was about restoration. And when the boys stepped back outside, same clothes, same steps, no one laughed, no one dared. They weren't returning customers. They were witnesses to their own vindication. And Clarissa? She didn't cry. She didn't boast. She folded the promotion letter once, placed it inside her coat, and walked across the showroom with the same quiet dignity she had worn like armor from the start. Respect, after all, doesn't scream. It stands. And now, to you, the listener, the witness, the silent presence behind the screen, ask yourself one question. What would you have done in Clarissa's shoes? Would you have ignored those boys, glanced at their sneakers and looked away? Or would you have opened the door to a future they weren't supposed to see? Not every act of justice needs a judge. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to kneel beside a dream and treat it with care, because kindness doesn't wear uniforms, and justice doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it just pulls up in a quiet car, steps out in yesterday's clothes, and changes everything. The glass doors slid open one last time as Cameron and Terrence stepped back into the morning light, each holding a key that gleamed, not from gold, but from meaning. They didn't smile for the cameras, now gathering behind showroom glass. They didn't spin the keys on their fingers or rev the engine to make a point. They simply walked to the Venom GT, climbed in, and sat. Still. Like royalty in exile returning not for revenge, but to reclaim their place. This wasn't about horsepower. It wasn't even about justice anymore. It was about presence. Proof. Yesterday they had been mocked for standing too close to a dream. Today, they owned it. No flex, no noise, just arrival. And sometimes that's the loudest thing in the room. Power doesn't shout, it simply arrives. And when it does, it doesn't need to explain itself. Inside, Clarissa Hale didn't gloat. She didn't pause to savor the stares or expect applause. She simply tucked the promotion letter into her jacket and walked through the showroom floor with the same grace she had shown two boys the day before. But this time, every step carried weight. Employees moved aside without being asked. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. The same people who once doubted her now followed her with their eyes. Not because she'd won something, but because she hadn't asked for anything. Her shoes made no sound, but her presence thundered. She didn't need volume to be heard. She had let character speak on her behalf, and in doing so rewrote what it meant to matter in a place obsessed with appearance. And in that moment, the story folded in on itself, not as an ending, but as proof that kindness is never wasted. Cameron's grip on the key wasn't about ownership. It was about becoming the kind of man who remembers what silence felt like and chooses not to pass it down. Terrence looked at the same glass doors that had once hissed dismissal and saw something else now. Possibility. Because when the world tries to measure you by what it can see, it's your character that shows them what they missed. Nathaniel stood beside them, not with pride, but with peace. His sons had been judged and seen. Clarissa had been overlooked and recognized. And the dealership? Well, the dealership had been taught that appearances sell, but respect sustains. Kindness is currency, but respect, that's legacy. And you. Yeah, you. Sitting there, listening, watching, wondering if stories like this really happen? Let me tell you something. They do. Maybe not with million-dollar cars or silver pens. Maybe not with velvet words in glass castles. But somewhere today, Someone just like Cameron is being told he doesn't belong. Somewhere, someone like Clarissa is doing the right thing quietly, hoping it matters. And someone like Bradley? Well, he's still trying to figure out how the room went quiet without him. So if this story moved you, don't just like it, share it, speak it. Be the Clarissa in a room full of Bradleys. Be the Nathaniel when your silence can strike louder than any shout. And if you're ever tempted to judge a kid by his shoes, pause and remember this story, because every time someone holds the door, speaks with care, offers a card, or listens when it's easier to laugh, the world shifts just a little. And eventually, those little shifts become change. Not because we shouted, but because we showed up. Until then, remember this: dignity never goes out of style. And kindness doesn't go unnoticed. Mic dropped, curtain closed. But the lesson? It stays. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next part.